Welcome to the Black Writer Studio, a podcast presented by the Hurston Wright Foundation and hosted by Dr. Khadijah Ali-Coleman. The Black Writer Studio is dedicated to showcasing Black writers who are transforming the world today with their literary pen and creating a legacy for the culture. Dr. Tara T. Green is an African American Studies professor with over 20 years of teaching literature and culture. She is the author and editor of 6 books on the lives and experiences of African Americans in 20th century literature and film. Her latest books are Love, Activism, and the Respectable Life of Alice Dunbar-Nelson, and See Me Naked, Black Women Defining Pleasure During the Interwar Era. A recognized academic leader who is dedicated to building diverse, respectful, inclusive communities in higher education, Tara T. Green is a self-described Black feminist, community-engaged scholar, mentor, and university professor. So I am very happy to finally meet you. We've been in communication via social media. This social media world is so wonderful. I'm one of the few people that I love it more than hate it. And I love it because it allows me to interface with spectacular people like yourself, writers who are also scholars, writers who also bring to the forefront folks in our history who, for one reason or another, tend to either get pushed to the fringes or completely into the shadows. And so one of the things that I find I am so excited to talk to you about is, first of all, you have a book that was just released January 2022 that I would love for you to talk about. And in talking about that, I'm wondering if it will then transition to this book that you have that's coming out in a couple of weeks, because that's very rare where an author has books coming out in such quick succession. So let's first talk about this book, Love, Activism, and the Respectable Life of Alice Dunbar-Nelson.
Yes, well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about this woman I've been walking with for 10 years. Alice Dunbar-Nelson, I met her in a college classroom when I was an undergraduate English major at Dillard University. And what fascinated me about her was, first of all, she had graduated from Straight University, which would combine with another institution to become Dillard University.
Okay.
She was an English teacher. She was a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. So this sounds like me. It's checking off my profile as well. But I'm not a fiction writer. And she captured a picture of a historical New Orleans. And I was there in the 90s in New Orleans. And so it gave me new eyes about the city that I traveled around in. As a student at Dillard, I had grown up on the West Bank of New Orleans. So she started her life in New Orleans, where she was born in 1875. And I knew she was from New Orleans, but didn't know much about her. I wondered why she left New Orleans. And so the book is about finding out all of those whys. Why did she leave New Orleans? How did she end up married to Paul Laurence Dunbar, who she would actually begin to correspond with? When she was quite young, she began publishing fiction. Her first anthology came out in 1895, and it captured his attention. So she would move from New Orleans. She lived in Brooklyn, New York. She also lived in Wilmington, Delaware for a number of years, where she made her career after she left Paul Laurence Dunbar. Then he eventually passed away. So that was her first husband. Then she would go to Cornell University and meet the person who would become her second husband. She would leave him. Not too long after, she would marry her third and final husband. And along the way, she had affairs with women. And she was trying to change the world through being a suffragist, and of course, still being a teacher and starting organizations. And so she was doing all these fabulous things. And I was shocked because I could not have known that had I not delved into the research.
So tell me, when you say that you met her, and I love how you say that, how you were connected with just her existence as a student while in college. What were some of the things? What were you merely introduced to her writing, or was it little snatches? For you to know what sorority she was a part of. What were some of those elements that you were introduced to? Because I'd love to know what did exist, if not that much, about this woman.
Well, you know how anthologies are. So they gave us a brief biography of her. I can't even remember. I'm pretty sure I actually still have that anthology. So maybe after this interview, I'll go back and look at it. It was the Heath anthology, actually. And so I don't know how much it actually told of who she was. But what stayed with me was the fact that she had graduated from the school that I would eventually graduate from. And so, for Black people who were able to get an education in the 1800s, I also kind of wondered about that. What were their hopes? What were they wanting to do? And so I had to go back and learn about an era that I really didn't know much about. So her fiction drew me into that, to learning more about a city that, for all intents and purposes, really didn't have any Black educated people, as far as I had been told prior to attending Dillard University. We all have to take, and probably still do, I don't know, this is the 20th century when I was going to school, but Louisiana history in the 8th grade sort of stopped at the Spanish selling Louisiana to the US. And so what Black folks really had to do with the Louisiana territory, let alone the state of Louisiana, I would never learn any of that. So that was the other thing, is that I became fascinated by the fact that this woman had grown up not very far from where I had grown up, on the other side of the river, and had never heard of her before. Why did I have to go to college? And I suspect that if I hadn't gone to Dillard University, I may to this day have never heard of Alice Dunbar-Nelson.
Right. That is fascinating, and so interesting that just that connection to you all attending the same school was enough to spark this interest. And that gives such insight as to when we talk about the importance of children and young people seeing themselves in books and the curriculum and the instruction. You can't get more vivid an example of that. One of the things that, one of the words that you used in the titling of the book is the respectable life. And I just find that such an interesting use of that word as you talk about the things that you learned about her, which really step outside of this really pristine idea of respectability, particularly when applied to women, particularly during that time when we have such inaccurate, I think, ideas of what womanhood and how women existed in that time space, and just in general. Here you have this highly educated woman, went to college, was navigating spaces with a high profile husband, but also making her own mark, also just creating spaces for other people. When you chose what was the reasoning to use that word in particular in your title?
Well, part of that comes from 10 years of revising. So I can't even tell you how many titles this book has had. And even at the point of signing the contract to with Bloomsbury, we were sort of going back and forth, and finally they said, this is the title. And so respectability or respectable had always been in that, because it's really at the basis of the book. Because I do talk about the politics of respectability, which it was just something that governed her life, but how she defined what that meant in her private life is worth that discussion. That was the book for me. That was the book that I wanted to read, and it became the book that I ended up writing.
That's amazing. So I then asked, did research for that book then lead to you for writing the forthcoming book?
Mm-hmm.
Because the topics, you know, when we talk about respectability politics, and just as you speak a bit about the things that you learned in your research about Alice, are we saying that, and let me just read this title because I love it. See Me Naked, Black Women Defining Pleasure During the Interwar Era. I love that. Mm-hmm. So this time period now is a little bit later than Alice Dunbar-Nelson's time period, but I see some intersections. Can you talk a little bit about how the first book inspired the second book? Did it inspire it, or what were some of the intersections that went into writing this book as well?
Yeah, they're definitely part of a long conversation for me, so they overlap. So while I was writing and revising and still doing the research on what I call the Alice book, she changes her name 3 times, so I just decided that I was going to call her Alice. But See Me Naked, as people will find out when you read the introduction, actually is a quote from something that she writes in one of her diary entries. And so I pluck that out of there, and I start off with her intentionally. So to give this example of what is meant by nakedness and what does that have to do with respectability, which I talk about in this book as well, because these women redefine what that means because they live their lives in public. And so the age difference isn't that much. It might be because Mom's Mabley and so you still have a couple of these women who are actually born along the time in which she's alive. And so she's older by just a little bit, but generationally, in terms of how she's raised as a Victorian woman who is still alive and very influential during the Harlem Renaissance, that's when these women began to emerge, those women being Moms Mabley, Yolanda Du Bois, Memphis Minnie, and Lena Horne. And so what I thought with them, I became really curious. So while Alice Dunbar-Nelson is determined that she's going to give so much of her time and energy to uplifting the race, what I wanted to know was, what if a woman, a Black woman, is not necessarily only concerned about that? And so instead of talking about the erotic, using Audre Lorde's definition, which was guiding a way to guide me in my writing for Alice Dunbar-Nelson, I used a definition of pleasure to talk about those other women who aren't necessarily interested in the race if the race enters with them, but they've already entered. So now what? How do I define myself according to what it is that I'm passionate about? I wanted to know, what did that look like? What were the examples? And it turns out we had plenty. So those were for the women that showed me a path towards that.
That's so fascinating. Did you come to this work already with a background? Because I hear in as you share this, I hear so many discipline intersections, everything from women's studies, definitely history, some aspects of sociology and psychology. What was your what is your background, or what expertise do you bring, or research interests did you bring to this work, or did it emerge in just being analytical from a literature perspective?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, my bachelor's, master's, and PhD, they're all in English. And African American literary studies, my secondary areas is African women's literature. But I am in African American studies. So the interdisciplinary work, I reside in an academic space that allows for that work to happen. And so, and growing up in the New Orleans area and growing up in churches, I don't just hear the stories, I feel them, I move to them. So I feel like my being is interdisciplinary as a Black woman from the South. And so my work reflects that. And what is sort of common that I draw from my training is the archival work. I'm very interested in the archive, and it may be papers, but it can also be listening to oral histories or an archive of music. So all of that comes together in my work.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I have not, in full disclosure to our audience, I haven't read your book. Became very quickly between us meeting and then having you on the podcast, but I am extremely interested in reading these both texts, because as you just explained, I see so many extension projects emerge that could be possible from this work that you've already done. And it's so interesting that you even said the music. When I think of, and when we think of the interwar era and looking at that specifically, as you mentioned, being that period that included the Harlem Renaissance, you rarely hear or have seen cultural examination of anything regarding Black women outside of us as entertainers, right? Where you have all of these images of the 20s or that early 1900 period with the flappers and really understanding how white women have, that was a period of ripening independence for them. But I feel that this is the first book that I've come in contact with, and just in the title alone, understand that it's examining something about Black women that is rarely examined, and particularly during this period of time.
Mm-hmm.
What were some of the standout pieces that you came upon and included in the book that really pushed against, it was hard, not necessarily hard for you to grasp or digest, but it was really stunning and you were excited to include it in the book? I'd love to know about some of the things that were like aha moments, or really new for you, that you didn't anticipate when you were doing your research.
Well, I was very intentional in who I chose. So I remember one of the reviewers saying that I should take out Yolanda Du Bois because the book is really about performers. But in defining performance, for me, was something that was really important. And Yolanda Du Bois had to enact a performance as the daughter of W.E.B. Du Bois. And so writing about her from her perspective, reading the letters that Du Bois wrote, and thank God for technology, because we have access now to Black newspapers, that we don't have to go flying around, digging around, looking for things and hoping we'll find it. Those are now available to us, as well as the digitized letters of W.E.B. Du Bois. I don't know how long it would ever take to really learn about the person Du Bois was. I mean, he was a layered, complex individual in all of his roles. People tend to only look at him in his roles as an intellect and a leader, and I was not interested in that. I was looking at him as primarily as a father, but also as a husband. So because being a husband obviously had an effect on his daughter. So learning about that relationship, which I kind of knew very little about because it just hadn't been presented to us, was something that I had a lot of aha moments in writing that chapter, and I intend to do more with that. And then there was reading Lena Horne, even though she writes it with someone, but her biography, her autobiography, Lena, and how she felt about being seen. She talks about that in a candid way, and that blew me away because that made me feel like I was on the right track. Um, Hearing what people had to say about Memphis Minnie, whom I did not know about. I had written about earlier blues women, but she comes after Ma Rainey and Bessie Smith. And she was born in Louisiana. So I was intentional about looking for women who had Southern connections as well. And what people would say about her, like there was this rumor that she cut a man's arms off in an alley. It's just hilarious.
That is hilarious.
And
That's
laughing
so
with Moms Mabley, whom I remembered as a child, but didn't know much about her either. But she was just the way that she got better as she got older. And so I had fun. I wanted to also do something where I would have fun because I was still writing during the pandemic. So that was important to me also.
Oh, wow. So both of these books were written during the pandemic?
Um, so of course the Alice book started long before the pandemic, but
Okay.
I ended up finishing it, the last revision during the first year of the pandemic, whatever year we're in now. And then I had started the year before the pleasure book. So that was written during the pandemic. And the last chapter in that book is about how I would come to have to define pleasure myself during the pandemic and connecting with nature.
Wow, wow. So it sounds like even when how you've defined pleasure, it's not when I hear the word pleasure, and I don't know if that says a lot about me, but I'm sure I'm not the only one that it immediately goes to a sexual idea.
Mm-hmm.
But it sounds like that when you're talking about pleasure, it really encompasses all these things that could also be called joy. So it's not necessarily sexually based activities or feelings, but things that bring joy, things that bring pleasure, but it's not necessarily within a sexual context. Would that be right?
Absolutely. So it's not just sex, even though I do certainly discuss that, but that's what I learned from the women, how they took pleasure out of being performers and what that meant for them and what it didn't have to mean for the audience was something as well. So getting in touch with pleasure practices became something that that I wanted to learn from these Black women's lives.
And it's so timely during a time where we are. It seems even more now than ever, we're exploring ways to have self-care
Yeah.
and to engage in self-care practices, engage in joyful experiences, because we're in the midst of a global pandemic, and for so many of us, we're still having to operate within spaces where there is no normal, right? And we're making this up as we go along. So this is such a timely topic to really begin to dig into. One of the things that I wanted to know or to talk about, I was really taken with how you even began to introduce the book, where this idea of being a race person, a race woman, or thinking about race how you were specifically looking for people who didn't really, that wasn't their forward facing platform, right? But I know, just from my own research and the things that I know about Lena Horne, because I heard her once in this interview on Pacifica Radio a long time ago, where she was talking about how her grandmother did work with Paul Robeson. And as we know, the mighty Paul Robeson was one of the first, civil rights activists, right? And this that we can think of in the 21st century or the 20th century. But I would love to know, when you looked at Lena Horne, what was it about her in particular where you didn't identify her as necessarily being on a race platform, and suitable for this book that you were putting together?
So I wouldn't say that the women weren't necessarily concerned about race, but it just wasn't their primary concern. And so by the time I got to the end of Lena Horne's book, where she helps us to understand what it was like to be the granddaughter of a woman who was also active with the Black Club Women's Movement, who was just an activist that people loved and respected. When she got home, she would walk past her husband, as Lena Horne describes, and wouldn't even acknowledge that he existed. And so, because they stayed in that marriage, because in public they should have been married, but in private they clearly didn't want to be married. So, so the silence that respectability politics presses upon Black people, and my concern, of course, is with Black women, is something that she had to grapple with. And she had to make decisions when she got married, because she does marry a white man. For her second marriage, she had to make a decision about that at a time in which she was a beloved woman of the Black community. She was very close with and working with the NAACP, but she loved the white man. So she has a decision to make, if she's going to put herself first, or is she going to concern herself with the criticism or of the race, the kind of canceling that may have happened during that period of time.
Right. That's so fascinating. Yeah, that's so fascinating. I love everything about what you're sharing about the book, but what I love is how you're even approaching this topic. I just think it's genius. Frankly, I think it's just very genius and very timely. I would love to know, were there any writers or any texts before that inspired you regarding the way you shaped this book, and particularly with this book? I love the fact that you're saying that pleasure, you're looking at pleasure as not only being sexual, but it definitely is a book about mores, social mores, and how women are really breaking through what these ideas of really respectability, being a woman, all of that. Was there any foremother, forefather, foreperson who wrote or had a similar book or had something that inspired you when you were thinking about approaching this topic and shaping this book?
It would probably have to go back to Alice Dunbar-Nelson, because I had been thinking about her so much, and she dies in 1935, and she had all of these medical problems that she dealt with. So she wasn't very old when she died, but she put so much of herself into the work, and she didn't get paid the way that activists may get paid today. And certainly not all activists, but for somebody who was as well known as she was, she would have been making a pretty buck today. but and she worked. That woman worked. I mean, she was always out there and she was always writing, and part of what drove her to write was trying to send things out and maybe get a little award, or maybe a little change for something that she had written. But she also would write about her tattered clothes and how she had to pawn jewelry, and her stepchildren and several of her nieces died. And so I became very curious about the impact of health, and the lack of access for Black people. And I hope that that would be an extension. So I think that her work certainly resonates. But in terms of scholarly work, I do want to shout out, well, a lot of people know her work, is Tracy Sharpley Whiting, who in Bricktops Parish, she writes about these Black women who, like Ethel Waters, for example, who left the US to go to France, and they had like $20 in their pocket.
Wow.
I couldn't do that. There's no way in the world. That's not enough to go down the street, as far as I'm concerned. Like we have to have all the stuff with us when we go.
That's
so
right.
The daring of these women, and the decisions that they made about their body and their art when they went to Paris. And Lena Horne is one of them, actually. So that the way that she put together that work and used the archives was an inspiration for the work that I've done as well.
This is so fascinating. I'm so glad that we had a chance to come together for you to be able to share about both of these wonderful books. Can you give listeners the details on where they can find Love, Activism, and the Respectable Life of Alice Dunbar-Nelson, and when we can expect See Me Naked to be released?
So the Alice book is out. You can go to my website, www.drtarategreen.com. That's DRTARATGREEN. And there are a couple of links there to the Bloomsbury website, where it's a little bit cheaper, but you can get it from Amazon. You can ask your local indie bookstore to order it as well. And then the See Me Naked, that comes out of Rutgers University Press. So you can order from their website, or you can go to other places, but it is, both of them are accessible. You shouldn't have any problems finding them.
That's wonderful. And I think by the time this episode airs, it should be released. And so I would hope that folks will go to your website to be able to get both. Do you have any idea of what's coming down the pipeline for you in terms of any other books that are in the works that you can talk about, or any research interests that you have that you really would like to write a book about that might be blossoming soon?
Well, I'm still fascinated by Du Bois and his relationship with his daughter. So there's so much more that can be said about that. And I've also been thinking through some essays on gender and race, because we've had a interesting 5 years. I mean, a lot has gone on. And so I've been taking notes, so it's time to start thinking about that. So I want to move into other genres also.
Yeah. Oh, I can't wait. I'm looking forward to what comes of it. I'm definitely looking forward to the book on W.E.B. Du Bois. I love the angle in which you're approaching from the perspective of his relationship with his daughter, because I think that I don't think anyone's really explored that, and that would be wonderful. So I want to thank you so much for joining us here in the Black Writers Studio. And, I'm urging our audience to check out your website, to purchase your books. And where can they find you on social media?
I'm at Dr. T.T. Green on Twitter, You can also look for me on Instagram. I think it's tara.t.green. So I'm on both.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.